you drop down here.
Yes.
Yeah, just click on this and then just go to Zoom meeting.
Well, it's now past 6:30, everybody. I think I must open this evening's meeting and virtual AGM. Some of you have been waiting patiently in the waiting room, in the Zoom waiting room, and I don't think we can delay any longer. I think we've got quite a lot of people already signed, 84 we've got to, so we're quorate, and I think we'll make a start. Let me do the first most important thing, and that is to warmly welcome you to this evening of wild celebration. And to those of you who are Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust members, I issue a further welcome to you to what will follow, which will be our formal AGM. Now, let me first introduce myself. I'm Christopher Purnell. I'm a Wildlife Trust trustee and for the last 6 years, and I'm your chairman and have been for the last 5 years. We're now, this happens to be my last meeting after years as your chair, and I'm really looking forward to the fact that we're going to conduct both 2 events tonight, this wild celebration to guests and members, and then the AGM just for those who are members. This is an annual event. It's always challenging. It sometimes can be a good fun, but coronavirus has made it particularly formidable this time. First, some housekeeping announcements. I don't need to direct you to where the exits are or where the toilets are. You can make your own arrangements at home. But I do need to stress a few points concerning Zoom. So, if there's any of you who've not yet done so, could you look at your name and change your name to full names so we can tick you off our attendee list? Most of you have probably done that already. You do it by clicking on the participant icon that's at the bottom of your screen. Hover over your name in the participant list and click on the More button and then click Rename. Now, if you're having any technical issues, or we are having any technical issues and you happen to get accidentally kicked out of this event, please try and log back. Please hang on and log back in, and we'll be behind the scenes fixing the error as quickly as possible. If you're having any technical issues and we can't get back to you, get you back into the event, then it's being recorded and we will send a video around after the event so you can catch up. We'll be taking some questions. Questions or need to do, look at the eye on the bottom and we'll pick them up as the questions. So at the bottom of your screen, if you tap it, you can see there's an icon chat. Just type in a question there if you've got one. Now, I have to say that many charitable organisations have postponed their AGMs with the Charity Commission's permission. But we decided to press on gamely, as usual, despite the extra difficulties involved in hosting such an event by Zoom. So please bear with us if we stumble a bit. Those of us older trustees like me are not as familiar with the technology as some of the younger whiz kids on the staff. It never ceases to amaze me how a butterfly expert or a bat enthusiast on the staff, steeped in the natural world, suddenly emerges as a highly competent computerized communicator. So my thanks in advance to them. So what is our program for this evening? We're going to start with 3 staff speakers and a video in celebration of all the good things that we've been able to do over the last year and that you've been good enough to
Is it
support.
worth clicking on Alan John? Just see.
This will be our wild celebration, or rather our celebration of all things wild. Everyone is welcome to join this session, whether you remember or not, and to take part in the Q&A session which will follow. There'll be a small break after the general public session before we resume for the Trust's AGM for 2019-20. And for that only Trust members can attend and participate. That AGM will include the usual items, the usual reports to our membership, and the appointment of auditors, and then an election to fill Trust vacancies. So now let's turn to our main item, the celebration of wildlife. I'm pleased to introduce the Trust's Chief Executive, Liz Ballard, to present this. She's made a brilliant job of steering the Trust through one of its most successful, indeed I'd say possibly its most successful years, 2019-20, only then to have to guide it through one of the most challenging years with coronavirus. It's undoubtedly the most challenging year we've had. I invite her now to review some of the highlights of last year and to introduce the celebrated video.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm just going to share with you my screen with a brief PowerPoint to introduce the video that Christopher's mentioned. So, this is a very brief review of the previous year, 1920. So that's April 2019 to March 20. And then other colleagues are going to tell you a bit more about some of our particular achievements on our nature reserves. So this is just really something that I kind of was reflecting on before the start of our AGM. And I was thinking about where we are in terms of nature and how nature is faring. And many of you will perhaps be familiar with this somewhat depressing statement. And don't worry, I'm not going to keep depressing you the whole evening, but you will perhaps have seen this statement before, that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And it was something that was quoted in the State of Nature report a few years ago. So it's a rather depressing statistic for us to own. And obviously as a wildlife trust, it's a key challenge for us. So, you know, when we think about biodiversity and we think of the decline of biodiversity, we're thinking about the diversity with species, between species, and the ecosystem services that they support. So it's all those services that we benefit from, the clean air, the quality of water, recreation, the enjoyment that we get from nature, as well as timber, the food production, all the many things that we benefit from that nature provides comes from this diversity of species, this complex web that in fact, you know, we are actually part of. So more broadly, at a United Nations level or a world level, this statement was shared earlier in 1920, that biodiversity is declining faster than at any time in human history. So again, another rather depressing statistic statement that came out. So then just thinking a little bit, well, you know, that's at the world level and the UK level. Well, you know, what about closer to home? What's going on in our patch in Sheffield and Rotherham? You know, we look at our kind of woodlands across Sheffield and Rotherham, and, you know, we see this really kind of quite fragmented picture with small pockets of really precious woodlands, but you can see there's so much woodland has been lost, or it's not very well connected. And we see that our woodlands are challenged. You know, they're constantly under threat from development. So, for example, we have here, some of you will know Greenough Woods, of course, which is our own nature reserve. But the picture on the right is, of course, a picture of Smithy Wood, which was under threat of development from a motorway service station. So we're constantly battling this fragmentation, this breaking up of our really important habitats. And we also see that habitat loss is going on locally as well. So, you know, we look at the global picture and we look locally at what has gone on. And this is just a picture of from Google Earth to the west of Sheffield. And you can see that we have these kind of, on the left of the picture to the west, are the moorlands of the Sheffield Moors Peak District, which is a very kind of degraded landscape in many ways. You can see the patches of almost bare earth there, for what should be really kind of very diverse, wet moorland area, supporting a real variety of biodiversity. And that connection should then flow down through that corridor of woodland that you can see and connect on into a wider area. But obviously it's a very intensively managed landscape. And as such, you know, biodiversity is very challenged in that area. And, you know, we see on top of that, the intensive management for shooting, for grouse shooting. And so we see some of our species, such as mountain hares, often snared or shot or reduced in numbers to support that type of management. So we have on our doorstep some of these really quite intensive management challenges. We don't need to look necessarily across to all that's going on in Africa and in Asia and in other countries to see this decline in biodiversity that's going on. And locally in our urban area, some of our once common mammals are also have been challenged and disappearing from our urban areas. And we have species such as the kind of common garden, as we used to think, hedgehog. And this picture infographic came out quite recently from the Mammal Society and showed how endangered the hedgehog was, and other species as well, such as water vole. And you know, what we've seen in Britain is that the population of hedgehog has plummeted from what was something like 30 million in the 1950s to only 1 million today. And looking at the stats that we put in our State of Nature report for Sheffield, not Rotherham, but for Sheffield in 2018, we saw that from the Sorby data that there was 30% decline thought to have occurred just in the last decade in Sheffield. So again, we're seeing it nationally, but we're seeing it locally. And of course, we can't forget the impact of climate change, which again, we sort of think is a global issue and we talk about it nationally, but actually these are some statistics shared from Western Park Museum through their work, which shows that ongoing upturning trend of an increase in climate and temperature, which, you know, is affecting the biodiversity that we see. Some species are really kind of responding well to that, and other species are really struggling, particularly species that perhaps require quite specific temperature and quite specific habitat. This will be a challenge to them. So what we're finding is species that were struggling previously because of all those habitat fragmentations are now struggling even more. So climate change exacerbates this problem. And to some extent, you could say, well, so what? You know, we like nature, we watch Spring Watch, we like to go for a nice walk, but you know, all these things are going on, you know, what can we really do, you know, why does it really matter? And of course, you know, we said, as I said earlier, you know, we are so interconnected with nature. It's so important to us, not only for that joy that we get from seeing nature on our doorstep, but also because of these ecosystem services, as they're called, that we rely on. And the more that biodiversity is undermined, the less the ecosystem services provide us. So all that clean air and clean water and all those things that we rely on become diminished if we don't care for nature and for biodiversity. So there are many reasons to look after it, and I suspect I'm preaching to the converted here. I hope I am. But these are sort of reasons for us to care for what is around us. So what can we do? Well, you know, already you are doing something because you are acting locally and thinking globally, I would say. So in the last year of 1920, you've continued to support us and continued to support local action. And together we have achieved a great deal. We've worked hard to work on the Lawton Review's approach of more, bigger and better, more joined up nature. So we are constantly looking for ways of expanding nature reserves and joining and connecting them up, and looking at this map work of how we can create nature recovery networks and local nature recovery strategies. So we've been working quite hard with partners on how do we join up the dots between the important pieces of landscape so they're not so fragmented, so that we can bring them together. And this picture I've shared before of Red Myers illustrates that with our Sheffield Lakeland partnership, where we look at bringing different landowners together. And I mentioned before about this slide, we've had a great success this year in 1920, where we actually, after many years of battling against the odds, a David and Goliath battle, we actually managed to secure, well, I would say we prevented Smithy Wood from being developed as a motorway service station, which took many years to get the application withdrawn. But we still do need to secure Smithy Wood for the longer term. It still could potentially be under threat in the future, but a fantastic achievement that we've done together as a trust with all our supporters to try and ensure Smithy Wood has a future. But not just thinking big, thinking small. You know, we continue to try and look at small sites, and in urban areas every bit as important. We continue to try and influence Amy to improve the road verges and move them from being these boring lawns on the left to something much more fascinating and interesting and good for biodiversity. And when you think about pollinators, you know, when you have a picture on the left and you think about the loss of hay meadows and you think about the increasing use of pesticides, it's not surprising that we've lost so many insects and bees. And so the work that we've been doing on Action for Insects, and many of you have helped with that, and you've helped with your own gardening approach, has really improved that. And we've also been working with many others on how we look at water and natural flood risk management. And we've done things such as tree planting to try and slow the flow upstream.
What's going on here? I can't hear a thing.
Which will reduce flood risk further down. So we've achieved a great deal. We've been campaigning about the moorlands and about our mountain hares and trying to bring back species like hen harrier. And we've been very proactive in engaging with people, as many people as we possibly can. We've done that, seen that through our website, through our outdoor learning activities, through the many projects, engagement projects, with different groups throughout the year, and that's continued and grown. And we're going to share a little bit more of some of that work that we've done together, because we really have achieved a great deal over the last year. So I'm just going to share with you a video all being well, which is quite a short video. It's only 3 minutes or so, and it just shares with you a little bit more about some of the achievements over the last year of 1920.
Put out a resource which actually gives ID to wildlife in dual languages, so we now have got them in Arabic and Urdu. Marginalised groups like refugees and asylum seekers meeting people from their local community, knowing that you can volunteer, and it kind of shows that wider community that refugees and asylum seekers make contributions to where they live just like everyone else.
And it's all about engaging people who are over 50 in the natural world for health and well-being reasons.
Wild at Heart, we bring the fun and the joy back into it.
Because of you, we can work outdoors together to help maintain and protect your local nature reserves.
I'm in my own garden this morning to talk to you about frogs and spawn.
And today's nature adventure comes direct from inside an old tree stump. No, it really does.
It really does!
And you can add your recordings here by just clicking this green button. We have a blog that shows some of the latest sightings that public have submitted onto our Nature Counts page, and some of the photos that have been submitted as well. Yeah, please get recording.
Volunteers are here today because we are working along Wyman Brook, and there is a little bird called Lita which likes open water and it's really blocked, so what we're doing is pushing back all the holly and all the pollen trees. Volunteers, we couldn't do it without them because their hard work is what is actually making the nature reserve better.
Just to finish, just wanted to share that amazing video with you, which I hope you caught most of. If there were some technical difficulties, apologies if that was the case. Just to finish off then, I wanted to just say, well, how do we know if we are succeeding? There's such a big problem with biodiversity decline, but we're doing all this work. How do we know if we're making any progress? And it was mentioned in that video a bit, the point about data and knowing what's going on with the species around us. So if you can get involved in helping us to collect data and tell us what you see around you and in nature around you, that will really help us to know what's happening in the world around us. And we've really noticed with lockdown that people are noticing so much more. So do find out more about Data for Nature, and Pete will tell you more about that shortly. So there's so much more we need to do, but we really have achieved a great deal in 1920, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations this evening.
Thank you very much, Liz. They will now turn to two other speakers this evening. First, we've got Pete Tomlin, who is the Senior Data Management and Monitoring Officer. Now, that doesn't sound very much like wildlife, does it, to many people? Followed by Roy Mosley, who is our Head of Conservation and Land Management. Now, that sounds much more like wildlife. But I want to make a point about this. Pete's going to talk about the importance of monitoring and data in conservation. It's not enough in wildlife conservation to be deeply knowledgeable about the birds and the bees and about the ecology. It's also incredibly important to be able to track and monitor data about numbers, particularly given the fact, as Liz has already mentioned, that we're facing huge losses. In fact, as many would say, we're in the midst of the Earth's 6th great extinction event. Even David Attenborough said it last week on the television. Roy will then paint a picture of the rich wildlife in our most popular nature reserve, Wyoming Brook. So over to you, Pete.
Thank you. Just bear with me whilst I share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, my name's Pete Tomlin. I am the Senior Data Management and Monitoring Officer here at the Trust. I'm currently working on the More Data for Nature project, and that kind of covers a lot of our nature reserve monitoring, and we're also kind of trying to develop landscape scale monitoring. So I'm going to briefly talk about how we monitor wildlife on our nature reserves. So just a bit of background. If you remember back to 2018, we had a really successful project called Nature Counts. And one of the key outcomes of this project was the State of Nature report for Sheffield, which they launched in April 2018. And a key recommendation from that was that we need to work to improve the quality of the data we have available in Sheffield on wildlife and habitats, both on our nature reserves and also throughout the area. So following that, we launched the Data for Nature project. So the first phase of that was an 18-month project funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And the aims were to improve the ecological data capture and management on our nature reserves, and to implement a monitoring approach, a monitoring framework on our nature reserves. And then we also did a launch of a new database that we developed, which we called the Nature Counts database, which I'll go into a bit more detail later. So the next phase is the current project, More Data for Nature. Again, that was funded by the Heritage Fund and also by RSWT, which are the Central Wildlife Trust body. And that's going to run until December 2022. So in this, we're going to be working with other wildlife trusts to develop an approach to monitoring at a landscape scale. And we're going to be working with local groups to facilitate them carrying out ecological monitoring on the sites they work on. And we're going to make further developments of our Nature Counts database. So just a bit of an explanation of our new approach to monitoring. So we're calling it an adaptive monitoring framework. Essentially, we start by identifying the key features on each nature reserve. So that might be a species or a habitat. And then we identify the factors that might influence those. So things like grazing or public access. And then for both of the features and the factors, we then set measurable attributes. And these are things that can inform the 10 or 5-year management plans. And then we go on to monitor those attributes, report on them, and analyze all of that data. And the key thing is that we then bring that back in to feed into the monitoring framework. So we might have to adapt certain attributes, for example, or if we find out something new about a nature reserve, like a species we didn't know was there, that then might feed into the monitoring. So through Data for Nature, we developed a 6-year cycle of comprehensive monitoring on 10 of the Trust's nature reserves. And we carried out a lot of baseline monitoring in 2019 across these. Some of the highlights of that, so at Hammondsfield, for example, we recorded snipe and breeding curlew, and at one point we recorded over 30 lapwing. At Blackamoor, for example, we did a bird species richness monitoring there and recorded 37 different species. So I wanted to maybe just focus down onto one of the nature reserves and kind of use that to demonstrate the range of different monitoring that we do at the Trust. So just starting with birds, with skylark. So the Trust did some previous work on the reserve to fence off an area to protect skylark from disturbance by dog walkers and cattle. And we got some remarkable results from the monitoring that we carried out. So we can see that virtually all the skylark recorded on the site were within the area of the fencing. So we carried out a monitoring protocol that is based on the BTO's Common Bird Census methodology. So we're mapping individual birds, and this enables us to work out how many territories that we think we have for a particular species. So the third visit was the most conclusive. So we can see that we had at least 5 different skylark holding territory at once in that area, which is an excellent demonstration of how effective our management work is. Moving on to great crested newts. So those of you that know the nature reserve will know that there's lots of ponds at Woodhouse Washland. And so we carried out 2 different types of monitoring to look at great crested newts. So the first was, it's called Habitat Suitability Index. And essentially we were looking at the vegetation and permanence of the ponds and assessing their suitability. And then Wildscapes ecologists, along with some of our volunteers, carried out counts for great crested newts under license. So out of all of the ponds that we assessed, 7 of the ponds got a Habitat Suitability Index score of good or excellent. And as expected, there was a correlation between the number of great crested newts counted in each pond and the HSI score. Several of the ponds got a low HSI score, but that would be to do with fish. And all of those particular ponds had low numbers of great crested newts. And we were also aiming to maintain a medium size of great crested newt population. So that would be between 11 and 100 individuals. And we recorded an amazing 82 different individual newts, which puts the site at the upper end of that scale. And the HSI scoring enables us to really target management. So for example, 2 of the ponds dry up annually. So if we carried out work to improve their permanence, this could help us create better habitat for great crested newt. And likewise, the HSI score showed that some of the newer ponds that had been installed need to develop a bit more, particularly the vegetation cover. So moving on to Odonata, so that's dragonflies and damselflies. Here we were counting species and noting their abundance for each species and looking for evidence of breeding. So there were several visits carried out over the summer. And we recorded 15 different species. The most records were for the blue damselfly, the common darter, and the emerald damselfly. And those 3 species were also the most abundant, along with the azure damselfly and the large red damselfly, which were both recorded in large numbers. And we also looked at species richness in each pond and each transect. And as expected, for 2 taxa that rely on good quality water, the ponds which were good for the newts were also good for the dragonflies and damselflies. So we can see how the improvements that we can make to some of the ponds can benefit both groups of species. Similarly, work at Woodhouse Washlands to renaturalise the river course there is going to be going ahead. So that will be really interesting to see how the results for the transects kind of change over time. And then lastly, we looked at harvest mice populations. So we did nest searching and also assessed habitat suitability for harvest mice. So this was to provide a baseline for us going forwards. So we're interested in the number of nests and the kind of cover that harvest mice, the cover of land that the harvest mice were using on the nature reserve. And this gives us an idea of the areas that were being used and if management can extend the range of for that species. So we ran a public event in November 2019, and over 20 people came along and helped us search for nests. We found just under 50 potential nests, with 27 of those positively identified. And by using a 20-metre buffer, we were able to estimate a kind of range of the species of just under 2 hectares, which can be used then as a baseline going forwards. So just a quick word to say that this wouldn't have been possible without our volunteers. They're a fantastic bunch. They've been out in all sorts of weather at all times of day, doing, wearing, seeing all sorts of strange things. We had 55 volunteers attending training courses organised by the Trust, and through the project, staff and volunteers have developed their skills and ability to record and survey, manage and utilise data to better inform the management work that we do. And then just moving on to our new Nature Counts database. So we had a small group of volunteers that spent a lot of time, I think about a year, inputting all of our historic data into this database. And also part of this database is a public-facing recording webpage where you can put in records of the species that you see in and around Sheffield and Rotherham. So we've got records coming in from the public, from staff, and from our volunteers. And by the end of the first phase of the Data for Nature project, we had about 20,000 records, and it now stands at above 30,000, which is fantastic. And all of that data goes in to the NBN Atlas to inform national conservation and research and some of those biodiversity indicators that Liz was talking about earlier. And it's not just about collecting data. So behind the scenes, this database gives us some crucial capacity to store and analyse our historic and current biodiversity data on our nature reserves and beyond. And we're developing this further through the More Data for Nature project. We're aiming to collect more different types of data and to develop more analytical tools and provide some of these services to local groups as well. So what's next? So we want to continue to roll out the monitoring framework to our other nature reserves, and we want to work with local groups to help them monitor their sites. So if you're part of a local Friends of group that might be interested, please do get in touch. Also, we want to collaborate more with other wildlife trusts, in particular Kent and Gloucestershire wildlife trusts, to lead the wildlife trust movement as a whole to be more evidence-based and support monitoring across the movement. Thank you. So I'm going to pass over to Roy now, who's the head of conservation.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, we could do that. We could start the question and answer session whilst we sort out some of the issues we've already had. So what have we got in terms of questions?
Right, Christopher, whilst we're just having technical issues, I'll read some of the questions. So Pete, there's a question for you after your presentation. How easy is it to increase permanence of ponds for crested newts?
So I think you'd be looking at, say, for example, the pond liner, or whether or not the pond was deep enough to hold enough water to avoid it drying out in the summer. So, you know, if you had enough funding to to do that work. I think it would be relatively simple. You know, get a digger in or something like that and make the pond deeper and fix any leaks or anything like that in the liner.
Thank you. And another question for you, Pete. How can more people get involved in the monitoring? Are you looking for volunteers currently?
Yeah, so unfortunately due to COVID, we didn't get to do any monitoring this spring and summer, but we're hoping that is now going to change. And we do have some monitoring planned for the autumn and winter. So we've got harvest mice monitoring at Carhouse Meadows, and we're also going to be doing some woodland condition monitoring at Greno Woods. So yeah, we definitely want more volunteers to get involved. So you can go on the website, go to our volunteering page and sign up.
Thank you. With Nature Counts, what attempts has been made to coordinate with other local organisations that collect their own species observation, for example, Sheffield Bird Study Group? Yeah, so we're really clear that the Nature Counts page isn't any sort of competitor to any of the other local groups. You know, if someone's a local recorder for the bird group, you know, they collect some really valuable data. So, you know, keep working with that group. As I said, the database is, you know, gives us a lot of capabilities in the background, so it isn't all just about the public facing aspect. But in terms of working with other groups, the State of Nature report is a really, you know, good example of bringing together, you know, the museum, the universities and some of the natural history groups in the area, and pulling all that data together to produce that State of Nature report. We'd certainly be looking to do more of that in the future when we're developing species action plans. You know, for example, we might want to work with the bird study group on plans for species like willowtip, which are really important in this area. Thank you. And I guess it's similar, but how useful are apps like Seek and iNaturalist for collecting data? Yes, so I've not really heard of Seek, but iNaturalist, it is useful. I would say it has its issues. iNaturalist, it's fairly it's used all around the world, and so the idea of iNaturalist is that you can put in a species that you don't necessarily know, and someone else will help you identify that. The issue with that is that we find that quite a lot of species records come back with American identification, which is obviously a bit of an issue. So the Nature Counts page is actually built on technology called Indicia, which is what iRecord is built on. And that's a bit more of a robust system in terms of it's linked to the UK species inventory, and it's linked to ways of validating the data, which kind of make us a bit more sure that that data is of good quality, if that makes sense. Thank you. And what plans have you got? How are you going to get back up and running again to do more monitoring after COVID? Yeah, so it's been a bit of a challenge. We've obviously got nearly a whole year's worth of monitoring that we've not been able to do. So I've kind of had to assess what we can do next year. You know, obviously there's certain stuff that is very time specific, so you can only monitor birds at a certain time and can only go out and monitor a wildflower meadow when it's flowering. So fingers crossed next spring and summer we'll be able to pick up a lot of that work that we missed this year. But as I said, we've got a couple of things going on in the autumn. So we've got the harvest mice monitoring at Carhouse Meadows and woodland condition at Greno. So, you know, we'll aim to get volunteers together and go out. You know, I think it's in groups of 6, and we just have to keep our fingers crossed that you know, the coronavirus behaves and we're able to get out there and do some work. Fantastic, thank you. And I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, Roy, or if anyone else wants to jump in, but do you think the sightings and hype around the bearded vulture has highlighted the lack of raptors in the Peak District on creating more engagement? That's probably maybe one for you, Liz, or Pete.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Well, I think probably both. I think the bearded vulture certainly sort of really got people quite excited about the potential for the wildlife that we could have on our moorlands. People were so impressed by that type of wildlife. I mean, you know, 9-foot wingspan, you know, a bird with a 9-foot wingspan is a pretty impressive bird. And, you know, many people have not seen anything like that before, and certainly not seen it locally. And obviously for quite a while, it was actually roosting in Sheffield, on the Sheffield moors. So, you know, it was fantastic to see it. And I think a lot of people very excited, very interested. And so people started to think about, you know, what our moorlands could be like in the future. Not necessarily for bearded vultures, I have to say, because well, it's a lone bearded vulture, and it's just set off recently, heading south. It's departed back probably to overwinter in somewhere slightly warmer, but yeah, it certainly was a real highlight, and hundreds of people were engaged in it. And we had our own bearded vulture evening, and we had over 200 people on that, and over 400 people signed up to it. So yeah, it's been great for engagement, but great for inspiring us, I think, to think about what our moorlands could really be in the future.
Thank you. And probably one more for you, Liz. Is there any possibility of increasing paid work for the Trust as part of local and national economic recovery plans?
Well, funny you should say that. Over the last couple of weeks, the government has released a fund called the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which is very much about economic recovery, but set in a kind of green context. And by green, they're particularly talking about the natural environment sector. So we have been applying for those funds, and it is very much about increasing the number of skilled and trainee staff that we can employ, as well as capital investment in improving habitats and enhancements, working on species action plans, and engaging the local community. So there are definitely some opportunities at the moment that are available. So we have certainly applied. Whether we'll be successful, who knows.
Thank you very much. There are a few more questions that we will try to either answer by email after, or if we got time at the end, but we've now overcome our technical difficulties, so I'm going to pass back to Roy. Roy, someone else is going to screen share for you, so that will happen now, and then if you can carry on with your presentation. We are overrunning slightly, so yeah, don't be afraid to speed it up a little. Okay, thank you.
Right, here we go again. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the wildlife of Foxhag and Wyming Brook Nature Reserves. Can you just have the next slide, please, Paul? Just to put a bit of geographical context to it, we've got the sites located to the west of Sheffield, in this sort of green area here. Foxhag and Wyming Brook, very close to one another. We consider them sort of one complex. In what we call the Western Valleys area, fringing the Peak District moors as well. Okay, next slide, please. Just zooming in a bit more now, you can see Wyming Brook to the west, Foxhag to the east. You can see very close together, almost joining. Overall, that complex covers about 100 hectares. And we also own this small site near Red Myers Reservoir called Hammond's Field. which is a fantastic little wet field area there. Brilliant for wildlife.
I can use one of the...
Next slide, please. Just a typical view, really, of Foxhag. It's on quite a steep slope. This is looking west towards Riverlin Reservoir, and the moors of the Peak District in the background there. Made up of a combination of sort of either woodland or sort of more open habitats. Next slide, please. So a bit more specifically on Foxhag now. It's a mosaic of heathland and young deciduous trees. It also contains numerous wet flushes, winding brooks, a mix of native deciduous and coniferous woodland, which sort of grades into more open heathland as you get to the Peak District moors and the western fringe. Part of Winding Brook is a site of special scientific interest, the SSSI, and Foxhag is designated a local nature reserve. Next slide, please. So on Foxhag, there's around 40 species of bird that have been recorded nesting. Notable species include migrant warblers, such as blackcap, willow warbler, and chiffchaff, alongside various other species, goldfinches, long-tailed tits, bullfinches, tree pipit, song thrush, woodcock, sparrowhawk. Some images to the right there, some of those species. And additionally, the wider complex plays a really important role for many species during migration. So we get things like redwing, fieldfare, lesser redpoll, and brambling. Next slide, please. Our star species on Foxhag is willow tit, really quite a rare bird. We've been carrying out a variety of improvements for the species over about 6 years. Woodland thinning, woodland scalloping, glade creation, allowing plenty of dead wood habitat, and the right sort of level of scrub for the species as well. So we really hope that these improvements will really benefit these species, over the coming years, as well as other partner organisations are doing similar things on a suite of sites in the area as well. Slide, please. Bit more of a focus on Winding Brook now. The rivers and brooks provide obviously a really good habitat for a host of species. Under the water, you've obviously got your fish, the brown trout and bullhead thrive in the pools. Above the water, you may well see a dipper or a wagtail feeding on the invertebrates. We've also got the elusive water shrew. So it's also been recorded on site. And we've been carrying out periodic woodland thinning along the river to benefit the whole sort of host of riparian species. Slide, please. So the mix of woodland on the reserve supports a wide variety of woodland birds. We've got 11 red listed species, 15 amber listed species. Most notable things like wood warbler, spotted flycatcher, woodcock, crossbill, great spotted woodpecker, tawny owl, sparrowhawk, you name it, we've got a whole host of woodland birds there. And we've been targeting woodland management work, including thinning, selective felling, glade creation, and creating standing dead wood to support this whole host of this whole assemblage of woodland birds. Next slide, please. On the west side, we've said it's sort of the site grades into heathland or moorland. This provides a really valuable habitat for sort of a different suite of species. the open glades and edges are utilised by reptiles, common lizard, and a whole host of invertebrates, butterflies such as small heath and small copper. If you head down there in the summer, on summer sort of evenings, you might be lucky enough to hear nightjars or see roding woodcock, or get a glimpse of an elusive tawny or long-eared owl. Yeah, some fantastic nocturnal species there. And other species that use this area, things like tree pipits, cuckoo, linnet, and a whole host of raptors. Next slide, please. We've done quite a bit of work with Sorby Breck, who do a lot of monitoring on the site using mist nets. They provide us with a whole host of data, helps us really understand whether our management's working, whether it needs tweaking, and helps reverse some of the declines that others have been talking about this evening. Slide, please. Oh, that's it. That's it. Final thank you to everyone for listening. This is a kestrel there, fantastic photo taken by our site manager, Rob Miller, who I must thank for helping pull this presentation together, and all the fantastic work that he does managing the site. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Just while I've got you, I've got a couple of questions from the audience. Of
course.
About your wider work as well as the presentation. Do you keep a record of how much fly tipping and rubbish is collected on nature reserves?
Yes, we do. We have a log that records all of that sort of information. It is quite, I couldn't see the figures off the top of my head, but it is quite a bit. We manage a number of car parks that are sort of, unfortunately, do get fly tipping, do receive fly tipping on.
Okay, I think we've lost Roy there. Pete, there's a couple more questions for you, if you don't mind answering them whilst Roy has frozen.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, thank you. So have you got any plans to do any monitoring at Carbrook Ravine?
Yeah, so that was one of the sites we were going to be carrying out monitoring on the meadows there this year. So we're going to do that next year instead now.
Thank you. And one quite specific question. We would love to monitor how effective we are at improving biodiversity in Broomhall with the Soustrings Wildlife Champions in Sheffield. How could we get help with this? I don't know if it would be for yourself or for Roy.
No, yeah. So if you're interested, if you're a local group and you're interested in monitoring, get in touch with the trusts. You go on our website and you can contact us there. And yeah, we could help you through the More Data for Nature project. We're going to try and train local groups and kind of help you roll out some more robust monitoring on the sites that you work on. So yeah, we'd love more involvement from different groups, so please do get in touch.
Thank you. I don't know if you'd know this, Pete or Liz or Roy, are there any wildlife webcams locally that you can recommend?
The peregrines on the university building, there's a webcam. There's also a website called, what's it called? Mammal Web, I think it is called, which is a webcam website where you can go and help identify the species that have been recorded. So you could go and check that out.
Thank you. And Roy, do we have you back at all?
I'm back, sorry, yes, lost connection
okay.
there.
So just a few questions from your presentation. Are there any other mammal records from Wyoming Brook?
That might actually be a better one for Pete. Yeah, I'm sure we have got mammal records.
Yeah, I think we've historically got records of badger. We've got records of deer and rabbit, things like that. It's it's fantastic.
Foxes, presumably.
Yeah. Well, not quite Wyman Brook, but you know, we know there's higher up in heading off into the moorlands, you know, we know there's watervole, things like that.
Great, thank you. Why does thinning forests help?
Yes, I suppose what we're trying to do is replicate part of the natural ecosystem that's missing. Obviously, we don't have, you know, the huge sort of numbers and size of herbivores that would have operated naturally in a fully functioning ecosystem. So we're sort of trying to replicate that by, you know, thinning out trees. Obviously, what that does is allow light down through the woodland into the shrub and ground flora layer, and promotes, you know, a lot more biodiversity, you know, both in terms of plants and animals, which in a closed canopy situation simply wouldn't be able to thrive. So it's about sort of replicating natural processes as much as we can.
Thank you. And finally, I don't know if you would know, Roy, but who owns the strip of land in the gap between Foxhag and Foxholes Plantation? Is there any chance of purchasing or liaising with them over the management?
I think that one's in private ownership. There's a private house or a couple of houses down there, and one of the landowners there sort of manages that strip up. Obviously, we're in close contact with them. We do talk to them, and you know, we have worked with them on some things over the years. So you know, we'll maintain that dialogue. Hopefully, you know, get some joined up management in future.
Great, thank you very much to the speakers. For the person who asked the Wyman Brook presentation to be turned into a leaflet, we probably don't have any plans to do that, but we can definitely put the presentation on the Wyman Brook web page of the website if people will find that helpful, and so you'll be able to look at that again as well. So I'll pass now back to Liz.
No, it's actually me. It's Christopher.
Oh, sorry, Christopher, thank you.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to express warm thanks to our speakers, Liz, Roy and Pete. I'm very much aware of how actors now have this problem when they're having to act without an audience, as we've all got in coronavirus. It is more awkward talking into a screen and not getting the feedback, and you know, I think it's one of the problems we have. So it'd be very interesting to see what, as attendees, people feel about this, because we will email to everybody a feedback email to see if you give us some views back, because we tried very hard to make sure that we do have an AGM and that we do put on a reasonably good show, but it can be quite difficult. We've dealt with our questions now. I have, no, I think that's closed that main session. I've got some things still to do. But Liz, did you want to say something?
Yes, I'm going to just interrupt there for a moment, Christopher, and I'm actually going to pass over to Mark Riddler as our Vice Chair of the board. So Mark, I can see you're there and you're unmuted, so over to you.
I am, yes. Can you hear me, everybody? Can you hear me, Liz?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, Christopher, yes, I would just like to say thank you to you. Extend thanks. As Christopher said at the beginning of this session, he stands down after the maximum 6 years of being a trustee period for the trust. You know, it's shortly after he joined shortly after it firmed itself as being a separate Sheffield and Rotherham trust. During the period that he's led the board, the trust has grown, you know, hugely in turnover. Pipeline. Excuse me. I know that that Christopher, you know, has seen his time at the trust as being a learning opportunity, having come from a sort of landscape environment to learning about wildlife and biodiversity. You know, in his dealings with the Trust and with us on the board, a lot of this has come through in his enthusiasm for all the projects we've had on, you know, things like the
Sorry, Mark, we're not. I don't think we're hearing you very clearly. Sorry.
Into hard to reach people and telling them about nature and getting them involved with nature, such as the Roma young people in Rotherham, and that sort of thing. But his role on the board, he's been very keenly aware of the role of the board of a charity such as the Trust, and he's been you know, very active in ensuring that the governance procedures and structures have been, you know, in place and updated, and that the executive gets the support of the strategic support of the board when it needs it, but without interfering, of course, with the expertise and experience that they have and getting on with their role, which they're very good at. Christopher's been a very dedicated chair. He's been very involved. He's not missed a single meeting since I've been involved. He's been involved with the he's been a member of the finance committee. He's been involved with the outcome group involved with campaigning, the Wildscapes board as well as a director, and probably loads of things I don't know about. So it's going to seem a very different place without him, without his guiding hand, and I'm going to miss him very much. So I would like to say thank you very much, Christopher, and would like to be able to lead a virtual round of applause, but I just don't think it's going to work. But anyway, thank you very much, Christopher.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark.
You can't do it.
Very kind of you. It's actually been an enormous privilege to both be a trustee and to chair the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, and I've learned a great deal and maybe contributed a little, and that's a good thing. I've just been enormously impressed by the quality of the staff, the quality of the trustees that we've had, and also the support from a huge range of volunteers, and generally the goodwill that members show towards us, shown by the fact that very few participants have dropped off this this session, despite one or two of our problems as we've gone along. So we've got a loyal membership there. So I'm very confident that with the continuing support of all our members and our other supporters, we're going to survive this coronavirus challenge. In fact, I've got a secret feeling that we're going to still be in positive money at the end of this year, despite all the challenges, and then go on to even greater things. It's become a bigger trust, it's had a bigger turnover, it's got more and more influence, people listen to it now, and look what good candidate trustees we get trying to join us. That's a great thing in itself. So thank you very much. And now remains for me to do three things. Finally, to thank everybody who's arranged the things so far, and I do include the technology people, though they might be a bit embarrassed at the moment, I don't know, but Tanya Shelley and Claire Hanley, OPIC, and Amy Simcox, thanks to you. What I'm now going to do is actually to announce the winner of this evening's raffle. A lot of you who have come tonight have been very, very kindly making donations this evening, and therefore we've entered all those people into a raffle. I've got the list of the names of the people, and they run from I've got them numbered 1 to 45. Liz, we're asking you to pick one of those because you don't know who they are. So just pick one of the 1 to 45.
33.
33. Now, I can now congratulate Sue Shaw, Sue, congratulations, you have won the wildlife gardening pack here. It's really good. There's lots of things in there, books and things to use, wildflower seeds and so on. And Tanya Shelley will make sure that you get this. She'll email you, make sure you get that at the end of this evening. And then there's one last thing I have to do for this stage of the evening, is to thank those who are non-members and who've attended this evening. I do hope you enjoy the public part of our proceedings, and maybe some of you will be tempted to actually join us as members. And you could do that online, you could do it now if you wanted to. And just all consider volunteering. But at this stage, I have to say goodbye to you, because we'll be now concentrating on our members for the rest of the Zoom session. In fact, we're going to have a pause so everybody can regroup. I think we're keeping the whole Zoom call open, but nothing will happen, say, for the next 10 minutes. Maybe 3 minutes to 8, we'll start up again. Okay, 3 minutes to 8, we'll start up again, and it will be the AGM then, which is for members only for the 2019 year, 2019-20 year. So thank you everyone else who contributed. Safe journeys home. Don't even have to say that now. And I'll speak to you all who are members in about 10 minutes time. Thank you.